So, talking through these, scope. Now, scope management, what's the term scope mean? Anyone? Excellent. What's in and what's out. So we even talk about what's in scope and what's out of scope. And here's the key thing. One of the biggest issues in project management is that we don't get clear what the deliverables are. Your whole job in project management is to give clarity to what those deliverables are. Now I'm going to give you an example of a story. It was an environmental company, and they had a not-for-profit, they had a government organisation, and they also had a private organisation. So they're all working together on a project. They rang me up, and the conversation kind of went like this. We've got one of those projects that are off the rail, and of the 3 project managers we've got on this project, is that 3 project managers? What? And then they said, and we're not sure which exactly steering committee they should be reporting to. How many steering committees do you think we should have? 1. So I didn't let them go too far from there. I said, well, I think I might just come along and have a look at what you're doing. So they said, well, look, here's the briefing. We've been going for 2.5 years. This is a 3-year project. We've been given both Commonwealth and state funding, so government funding. And we've been running these 3 organisations on this project, and we don't think we're all working together. In fact, even each organisation, the scientists in that organisation haven't agreed on which methodologies we're even going to use. So who thinks this could be a little bit of an off-the-rail project? So I turned up and it went like this. They came in and I got them together. Now luckily, because people bring me in as a project management specialist, they often don't ask you about your other qualifications. So as I mentioned, I've got a few. So I can actually look like I'm ignorant often, and they won't even realise I know more about their industry than they do. So when I went into there, I asked this fundamental question, because I know there's a couple of people in the audience who are in environmental areas. So you would understand this industry. And I went in there and I said, look, excuse my ignorance, but is this a conservation plan or a conservation management plan you're creating? And then they kind of looked at each other and started having a discussion. So clearly they did not know. So do you reckon there was a bit of ambiguity in even what they were creating? I then said, and this is the technique I want you to always remember, I said, you know what? I don't understand what you're actually creating. So now we know it's a conservation plan. What I want to do here, and I drew up here and I put on the top, table of contents. And I put up there and I said, just what would be in this thing? What is this plan? And then they started saying, well, we would need to have this, we would need to have that. And I started just drawing up the table of contents. And then when I got to the technical area, I said, yeah, again, excuse my ignorance, but isn't that like the technical stuff there? What would be that? Would that be like a table there? And they go, no, yeah, it has to have the table of the data. So once I started drawing up the table, I said, look, let's just draw up what the table kind of looks like. And as they drew up the table, guess what happened? The scientists started saying, oh, we can't use that methodology for getting that data. We'd have to get that and that. And they started agreeing for the first ever time on what the deliverable was about. See, if I have, say, 20 people in the room, and I say to you, I want you to go and do a history of Australia, how many different styles of report am I going to get? 20. Usually a group this size will be 21. Someone's going to have a split personality, right? But when you look at it, how did we do it at university or school? How did they give you the clarity to say, when you put in your assignment, this is exactly what I want? What did they do at school? Do you remember? What were some of the tricks? Yes, they actually said, they might have given you an outline. They might have said, here's the word count. Here's the questions we want you to respond to. Here's how big we want you to write it. Here's the key points we want you to mark off. So here's the tip here. Whenever you see ambiguity, you will draw a line in the sand. You'll get the clarity. You'll take it back to the project sponsor, who is the authority that the project manager is working on behalf of, and you get it signed off, and then get back to the project. Because if I just say a report, is that good enough anymore? No. If I said a report that includes and gave you some dot points, do you think that would help to get clarity? Yeah, because I'm going to get what I want. It's the same as if I say fence. I'm putting up a fence. Is that good enough anymore? Because here's the thing. Every time I say fence, you're probably thinking about the fence at your own house. So some of you are thinking little fence. Some of you are thinking big fence. If you're from the Defence Department, you're thinking big fence, right? So what does that mean? It means that you have to put details around it, and the kind of trick we use, we say if you can visualize it as I'm saying it or reading it, we're going to be on the same page. There's less likely that we're going to have a misinterpretation. So can anyone help me with the concept of fence? If I want to make fence more clear, what could I do? Height. So I say, okay, this is a 2 metre. What else would I want? Excellent. Hardyplex, green, this material, etc., and this long. Now, once I start giving you that details, do you think that each of us would be starting to be able to see what that fence was? And by the way, if you got that clarity, could you go and get a quote on it easier? Yeah. You even ring up a real estate agent. Have you noticed when you ring up a real estate agent, you want to know about a house, they go, oh, this is a, what do they say? This is a, sorry? 3 by 2. That means something, doesn't it? 3 bedrooms by 2 bathrooms. Then they'll say what? Yeah, brick and tile. So that starts telling us the make of it. They might then talk about two-story or single-story, etc. And when they're explaining it, you're getting a better picture, aren't you? So even when we do construction buildings, we normally have to state that level of detail and then say, as per drawing. Because here's the thing, do you think everyone can read drawings? No, but can everyone visualise something if I start saying this is a 2-story, brick and tile, 4 by 2, double block-up garage? You start seeing it, don't you? So if you can get to a point you start seeing it, do you think then we're going to have less communications issues? Do you think it's going to be easier for us to go and plan it? Do you think it's going to be easier for us to go and get it costed and work out how long and what effort we have to do to create it? But if you find any ambiguity, you've got to draw the line in the sand, get the detail, get it signed off and get back in the project. I had one just recently. A person rang up and he said to me, oh, Todd, I'm working as a consultant. I'm working on this client. And they haven't got clarity in the they've got a bit of ambiguity there. I always remember you said, I've got to draw the line in the sand, get it marked. I said, absolutely. He said, but they're coming up towards the end of the project. Should they still do it? And I said, absolutely. When do you do it? As soon as you realise you've got ambiguity. So they went back to the client and they weren't convincing enough because the client said, you know what, we've only got a couple of months for this project, don't worry about it. But here's what happened. At the end of those 2 months, when they tried handing it over to the client, guess what the client said? That's not what I said. And guess what? 6 months after that, they were still finishing the project. Guess who was paying for that 6 months? They were. Who gets what I'm saying here? You've got to get absolute clarity. So when I then came back with that clarity, with those 3 environmental companies, and we then said, this is what we're creating, right? They were 2.5 years into the 3-year project. The sad thing is, they needed to go out and get specimens over seasons to get the data they needed. Now we realise what they needed to be able to put into this report. So guess what? They weren't going to be able to do it. And as a consequence of that, we had to pull out what I'm going to introduce you to as the angel in the back pocket, which is, does anyone know, starting with C, it's the... So many C's, it was like a choir, C for choir. It's called a change request. A change request, some industries, particularly engineering, environment, etc., will call them variation requests. But here's how it works. If someone wants a change, anyone could require a change. But we have to follow a process because if someone says, oh, Todd, while you're there, can you add this? Or while you're there, can you do this? And you might think it's a 5-minute job, but guess what? It ends up being day jobs. Or it is a 5-minute job, but then someone else says, well, can you do it for me as well? And you can't say no to one and yes to another. So when you look at it, here's how it works. As soon as someone says to you, I want this change, you pull out the angel in the back pocket and you say, that's a change request. No problems. We can do anything. So if I go to a person who's a key stakeholder who may have said, I want this change. Now imagine I've gone to the person, I've actually defined what the change is, I've looked at the justification of it, I've looked at the impacts on the time, budget, etc., and I go over to the project sponsor. And the project sponsor says, yes, I want it, or they say no. Now if they say yes, they're going to also give me the budget, the schedule, everything that I've asked for. Because if you don't, guess what happens? You start with a little project. They say, why are you there? Can you do this? And the next minute, you've got the Ben-Hur of all projects, but no one's giving you any more budget or schedule or anything on it. So when you look at it, when I go to the project sponsor, if they said reject, here's the thing. Imagine this. They've said reject. I go back to the person and say, sorry, the project sponsor doesn't want it for these reasons. Now, let's just think through this. Is my relationship with the requester good? Because I've actually not only helped them, I've actually taken their case in writing up to the project sponsor. So is my relationship here good? Absolutely. Is my relationship with the project sponsor good? Because the project sponsor is only going to get what they want, and they know that if there's any changes, they're going to be able to have the authority to approve them or deny them. Do you reckon my relationship with the project sponsor is good? Do you reckon my relationship with my team is good because I'm not asking them to stay back overtime, late, etc., because I've actually taken on extra work with no extra money or schedule? Is my relationship there good? Is my relationship with my partner, my loved ones, because I am going home on time, do you reckon that is good? Yeah. So the question is, why the hell isn't everyone just using it? And the reason is, one, sometimes they just don't know about it. Two, they think, oh, it's just a 5-minute-er. We'll just won't even worry about it. Three, it could be that they're just not following a good process. Four, and this is where the angels' wings get ripped off. It sounds awful, doesn't it? Change requests are hard to do if you haven't defined the deliverables well enough, because the person will argue, that's not a change, that's what we imagine, that's what we interpreted you're doing. So that's why your ambiguity has to be absolutely clear. Then we apply change for any time someone actually asks for a change. Does that make sense? Absolutely critical. Because without that change, things go awfully wrong, because then suddenly I've got a bigger project, all these other things that are actually come on top of it, which I haven't been given the budget schedule for, etc. Now, in addition to what's in scope, because I think you're now clear, having clear deliverables is the key to this project. Because when I go into a project that's off the rails, almost all cases, they don't have clear deliverables. Because finishing up on an environmental company, here's the thing. They'd been running for 2.5 years, just like you would have run off and done a history of Australia for me without getting absolute clear on what it is that I wanted. Well, they ran off for 2.5 years, 3 very diligent businesses, running, doing, very smart people doing something. They were doing something, so they were using the resources, but they weren't doing the thing we needed to. So at the end of the day, when they weren't going to deliver it, I had to fill out a change request. I was the person ranked to go to the Commonwealth and state and talk about the change and then say to them, well, we've realised this is where we've got to. We know where we need to be, but unfortunately we don't have that defined scope to a point that we can deliver in the next 6 months. So here's a change that we were proposing, and luckily they accepted it, so we could still deliver. Now here's the funny thing. Each of the 3 came to me, the bosses of each of the organisations said, can we sue them? Can we sue them? Now the funny thing was, it was so much ambiguity there that they took that ambiguity and put it into the contract. So all the legal document was just had the same ambiguity. So could they sue anyone? No. In fact, it may technically defect the legal contracts. Now the last aspect of scope is to know that there's actually 2 parts to scope. One is called product scope. That is effectively the deliverables. So we have to define those with absolute clarity, as I mentioned. That's the product scope. The second part of scope is called process or project scope. That's all the work we have to do to create those deliverables. So if I'm building a new car, for example, I would have had to do all this work to be able to design and build that car. So the product scope is the car. The process scope is all the work we had to do leading up to it. Does that make sense? Process or product scope, and process or project scope, and then product scope is the deliverable. And the last thing about scope, just as an introduction, is you heard Ben say it before, what was in and what was out. To get absolute clarity on what the scope is, we should be defining, here's what you're getting, and just so you're absolutely clear, so we've got no confusion, this is what you're not getting. Who's been brave enough to build a house, by the way? Anyone been brave enough? Yeah, good experience or bad experience? It gets easier, doesn't it, when you get more experience? Yeah? Excellent. Well, here's the funny thing. There's a point there you would remember. They ring you up and say, lock up, you go and get the keys. Exciting time of your day, because you're going to go and drive to your house for the first time and get the keys, be able to park in your garage, get out, and it's actually your house. So they ring you up and say, you got the keys. So you're in your car, you're driving towards your house, you're really excited, you turn into your street. You're driving to your house now, you indicate to go into your driveway, and you stop because there's no driveway. And you get out and go, any idiot knows, house, garage, road, where the frick's my driveway? Now, by the way, is the project sponsor, being the client, is the client actually happy? No. What are they focused on? Yeah, what's not there, what's actually missing. Now, independent on how grandiose the house is, are they upset? So do you understand that we can lose the project sponsor there and then if we haven't been clear on what we're delivering? Because if we don't give them something, you can see how things can go awfully bad. When we could have said up front, just so we're clear, this is what you're not getting. So do you think that's important? The last story on that one was a colleague of mine. He owned a dive boat, venture. And I was a dive master at the time, so I was working on the boat. And he was talking about this brand new boat he was getting built. It was an aluminium boat. Anyone into boating here? Yep, a few of us. Yep, cool. And he had this boat being built, but they didn't say to him what was not out of scope was the engines. So he's turned up and he's gone, great, I've chartered the boat out, got to pick it up, it's going in the water, we're going to charter the boat out. And as he arrives, he goes, well, where's my engines? He goes, oh no, I told you they were rated for 2 125 horsepower engines. He said, but, they don't come with it, they're not a part of the package. So do you reckon he was a bit upset? Could have he been less upset if they told him up front, by the way, that cost doesn't include the engines, so pick your engines. Now what happened in that particular case, when he went and picked it up, they didn't have the engines. They only had 2 engines in there, and they were rated for 125 horsepower. But the only engines he had was 2 350s. Now you don't put 350s on something that's 125, but how it worked, we go to the event, he goes, oh, Todd, can you go and get the trailer? Don't put it in the water too much because I don't want the rust. So I'm getting in thinking, going, well, I'm not going to put it not too much out of the water because I've got to winch this damn thing up. So he reverses the trailer. I reverse the trailer in the water and he goes, stop. And I'm not really in the water, to really winch the thing up. And then he stands there and he goes, and the boat jumps out of the water onto the trailer. And I went, oh, that's what you do with 2 350s. I was a bit worried about his metal fatigue on it, but that's how he did it. So that's scope management. So in summary, scope is product or process scope, being very clear what's in and out of scope. And just remember, if there's any ambiguity, what are we going to do? Draw a line in the sand, get the clarity, get it signed off, and get back onto the project.